I was paralyzed, a silent witness to my children auctioning off my life. Their greed was louder than the steady beep, beep, beep of the monitor keeping my broken heart beating. I am Alara Sterling, and this is the story of how I died and was resurrected at the hands of my own flesh and blood. The sterile white of the hospital room was my cage, the incessant rhythmic pulse of the life support machines, my tormentor. I lay still, a queen dethroned not by a hostile force, but by the devastating internal storm of a massive stroke. I could not move. I could not speak. But I could hear. Oh, how I could hear. It was the 5th day. I'd been in and out of a conscious fog, a cruel limbo where the mind is alert but the body remains a statue of marble. Then the whispers began. Not the soft, caring inquiries of nurses, but the sharp, calculated murmurs of those I had nurtured, the ones I had built an empire for. Dominic, my eldest, the venture capitalist who saw the world in terms of acquisition and profit margin, spoke first. His voice, usually a smooth velvet meant to charm investors, was now hard, metallic. The Opal Coast estate must fetch at least $20 million on the market. With this current surge, we're looking at an easy $20 million. We must move swiftly to appoint a conservatorship. His voice was void of any emotion, a pure transaction. 20 million, I thought bitterly. They weren't counting my remaining days. They were counting their future millions. It was the only number that mattered to him. Then came the brittle, high-pitched interjection of Juliet, my daughter. But what about Mother's Art Deco jewelry collection? The emerald parure? It's generational. We should auction it separately. It's easily worth $3 million. Her tone was not of mourning, but of greedy impatience, afraid that any delay might diminish the value of the gems. The emeralds given to me by my late husband Arthur, on our 30th anniversary, were being reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet. Their sentimental value utterly disregarded. Tristan, my youngest, always following the leader, added his calculated agreement. I've already contacted an art broker about the impressionist pieces. We should liquidate before the estate tax gets punitive. We need to frame this as executing her unspoken wishes for financial clarity. He was concerned with the logistics of greed, ensuring the process was flawless, unspoken wishes. My wish, my dears, was for one of you to hold my hand and whisper a prayer, not to calculate the liquidity of my personal tragedy. The betrayal was not just in their conversation, but in its utter lack of human emotion. There were no tears, no "we miss you, Mother," no "we hope you recover." There was only the cold, hard currency of my imminent death. They were dividing my life like vultures over a carcass that was still breathing. The utter injustice of their avarice ignited a raging inferno within my still body. I was supposed to be the matriarch, the unbreakable foundation, the quiet force that held the Sterling name together. Now, I was reduced to a lucrative obstacle. This moment of supreme humiliation was my rebirth. I realized that my most important task was not to survive, but to fight back, to protect my legacy from the very people I had hoped would carry it forward. I had to reveal the true meaning of the word inheritance, a sliver of hope. An unexpected ally appeared in the form of my granddaughter, Cora. Unlike her mother, Juliet, Cora possessed the sensitivity I remembered in my younger self. She visited me quietly, often after the consultations of her mother and uncles, and she saw the flicker of sentience in my eyes that the others missed. "Grandmother," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I hear them." "I'm so sorry. But you are a warrior and you are not alone." One evening, under the pretense of adjusting my pillows, Cora pressed something small and cool into my hand, a single prepaid cell phone, activated with an encrypted, untraceable number, a lifeline in my frozen world. "Only call one person, the one you trust absolutely," she instructed. "The others must never know." That night, with painstaking, almost inhuman effort, I fought the paralysis. My mind screamed at my fingers to move. It took what felt like an eternity, every muscle fiber tearing, before my right index finger twitched. Then I managed to tap out the 7 digits of the only person who knew the full, intricate tapestry of my estate planning, Mr. Alistair Finch, my longtime estate lawyer. My whispered call, a garbled sound that could easily be mistaken for a cough by the night nurse, was enough. I managed to force out 3 strained words. Finch, Opal Coast, now. They were celebrating their fortune, but I was about to reveal that the jewel in my crown was a fake, a brilliant, devastating trap laid 10 years ago. Mr. Finch arrived the next afternoon. He did not look at Dominic or Juliet, who were bickering over the terms of the liquidation. He looked at me. I could not speak, but my eyes conveyed the message. Initiate protocol, lighthouse. I moved my hand again, tapping out a slow, deliberate rhythm on the bedsheet. 3 short taps. 2 long taps, 1 short tap. It was a pre-arranged code from 20 years ago, a safety measure Arthur and I had established in case of catastrophic incapacity. Mr. Finch nodded once. His lips barely moved as he whispered back, "The paperwork is filed, Alara. The $20 million lie is about to be exposed." The irony was magnificent. They were rushing to sell the Opal Coast estate, the spectacular mansion overlooking the Pacific, believing it was the cornerstone of their fortune. They were so blinded by the zeros, 20 million, that they missed the fine print, the very essence of my soul embedded in the deed. Dominic, Juliet, and Tristan had set the date for the emergency transfer of assets in just 48 hours. They were ready to cash in on my silence. They had no idea that my silence was the most powerful weapon I possessed. They were about to learn that true wealth is not inherited, but earned through character, and that I had already given my most valuable asset away, 10 years ago, for a purpose far greater than their greed. The stage was set. The children of the Sterling dynasty were about to crash, hard, against the unyielding rock of their mother's forgotten promise. The $20 million mansion was a mirage. The true inheritance lay hidden in the forgotten pages of a 30-year-old trust document, a legacy built on a promise. I continued my silent observation from the hospital bed, the emotional impact of the confrontation yet to come being my primary fuel. My recovery was a secondary concern. The execution of the lighthouse. Protocol was all that mattered. My children were so consumed by the immediate logistics of their supposed fortune that they were completely oblivious to the legal storm gathering overhead. Dominic spent hours on calls, speaking to potential buyers, his voice radiating a repulsive confidence. Juliet was planning an inventory of my clothing and accessories, already earmarking pieces for her personal collection. Tristan was developing a complex tax model for the $20 million, calculating the most efficient way to shelter the funds. It was sickening. Every act was a calculated move toward financial gain, utterly devoid of filial concern. 4 days after my call to Mr. Finch, the confrontation began. It wasn't in my sterile hospital room, but in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Sterling family law firm, a deliberate choice by Dominic to exert maximum psychological pressure and control. I was wheeled in on a gurney, a physical reminder of my incapacity, placed strategically at the head of the long table like a museum exhibit. Dominic had prepared a meticulously detailed presentation. It was nauseatingly efficient, detailing the timeline for the sale of the Opal Coast estate and the anticipated net profits, a staggering $20 million, broken down into complex investment structures for each of them. He spoke of my legacy with the reverence of a hedge fund manager describing a highly leveraged asset. "Mother," Dominic began, his voice condescendingly gentle, clearly rehearsed. "We understand this is difficult, but this strategic move ensures the long-term stability of the family wealth. We believe this is what Dad and you would have wanted, given the circumstances. What Arthur and I would have wanted." The lie hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was about to click to the next slide, the final one authorizing the sale, when the door opened dramatically. Mr. Finch entered, flanked by a security guard. He carried an old leather-bound folder, a folder I hadn't seen in 15 years. The tension in the room ratcheted up instantly. "Mr. Sterling." Finch's voice was sharp, cutting through the boardroom tension. "I must interrupt this presentation. There is a matter of legal jurisdiction and ownership that supersedes your current proceedings." Juliet scoffed, her annoyance visible. Ownership? Don't be ridiculous, Finch. The deed is clearly in Mother's name, Alara Sterling. It was in Mrs. Sterling's name, Finch corrected, placing the leather folder on the table with a resonant thud. For a time, 10 years ago, Mrs. Sterling and her husband, Mr. Arthur Sterling, established the Lighthouse Legacy Trust. A wave of confusion washed over their faces. Tristan was the first to speak, his voice betraying his disbelief. A trust? Why didn't we know about this? It would have been flagged in all our audits. It was designed to be confidential, Finch explained, the tone unwavering. A contingency plan, a legacy of a different kind. The trust specifies the transfer of the Opal Coast estate, the physical property and the surrounding 5 acres, into its custodianship. Dominic leaped to his feet, slamming his hand onto the table, his carefully constructed composure finally shattered. This is insane! A fraudulent transfer. We will contest this. It's a clear case of undue influence given Mother's current state of incapacity. Hardly, Mr. Sterling, Finch countered calmly, already anticipating the objection. The transfer was executed legally and irrevocably on October 25th, 2015. Mrs. Sterling was in perfect health and of sound mind, and the transaction was witnessed and notarized by 3 separate legal entities, including a medical doctor who certified her capacity. He slid a copy of the irrefutable, ironclad deed across the table. Juliet grabbed the document, her manicured nails digging into the parchment, reading the unfamiliar names and seals. But who is the beneficiary? Who is the trustee of this Lighthouse Legacy Trust? It must be some distant cousin. That was the moment I had waited for. The true power move, the physical manifestation of my promise to my friend. Just as the suspense peaked, the side door of the boardroom opened, and a young woman stepped in. She was not a lawyer, not a financial advisor, but an architect, a brilliant designer of sustainable, community-focused housing. This was Aisha Varma. She was the goddaughter of my dearest friend, Margaret, who had passed away 7 years ago. Aisha was a prodigy, having forgone the corporate architecture world to focus on humanitarian design. I am the newly appointed sole trustee of the Lighthouse Legacy Trust, Aisha announced, her voice soft but authoritative, carrying the weight of a powerful mission. She smiled warmly at me, acknowledging my silent presence. The Opal Coast estate is no longer a private residence to be sold for profit. She paused, letting the bomb drop, ensuring maximum emotional impact. It is now a fully funded, non-profit center for young, single mothers pursuing advanced education in the arts and sciences. It is a place of healing, not of acquisition. Dominic looked like he had been struck by lightning. His $20 million dream had just evaporated. The Opal Coast estate, the symbol of their generational wealth, the magnet for their greed, was gone. It had been transformed into a beacon of compassion. The look on their faces, the sheer, unadulterated shock and fury, was a sight worth more than any emerald parure. This was the end of one chapter, but only the beginning of my ultimate lesson. Their inheritance was gone, replaced by a devastating choice: serve humanity, or forfeit the very name they sought to honor. The true price of wealth was service. The silence following Aisha's declaration was deafening, a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony of their avarice. The boardroom, designed for ruthless business, now felt like a church, filled with the undeniable weight of a moral revelation. Dominic was the first to regain his voice, but it was a snarl of pure venom, his attempt at decorum completely abandoned. You manipulative old woman, he spat, taking a threatening step toward my gurney. You did this while lying in a hospital bed. This is a malicious act of spite against your own children. I wanted to laugh, but my throat refused. Spite? No, Dominic. This is justice. This is the consequence of prioritizing greed over your own mother's life. I wished I could tell him that his behavior was the true malicious act. Juliet, ever the dramatic one, began to weep. But her tears were clearly for the lost $3 million from the art collection she was so eager to sell, not for my well-being. How could you do this to your own children? We are your blood! We sacrificed so much for the family name. Sacrificed? They had sacrificed nothing. They had only consumed. Mr. Finch stepped forward, his expression solemn, a masterful showman saving the best for last. Let us move on to the remainder of Mrs. Sterling's personal assets. The stock portfolio, the bonds, and the liquid cash, a substantial sum totaling over $50 million. The figure was an immediate reset button for their fury. $50 million was still a colossal amount, enough to dry Juliet's tears and reignite the calculating glint in Dominic's eyes. Tristan actually looked relieved, his pragmatic brain already running new financial models. Now, that is more like it, Dominic muttered, smoothing his tie, his confidence partially restored. However, Mr. Finch continued, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He loved this part. It was the ethical core of my entire plan. Mrs. Sterling has instituted an ethical service clause into the distribution of these funds. A final codicil, which was signed, witnessed, and notarized 6 months ago, long before her current incapacity. The air grew heavy again. This was the true trap, the one that tested their character, not just their greed. It was a condition designed to force a fundamental change in their moral framework. The clause mandates that before any part of the remaining $50 million is released to you, the primary heirs, each of you must fulfill a requirement that reflects the true values of the Sterling name. The values your father and I hoped you would embody, Tristan, the one who always craved the validation of his peers through accomplishment, asked, his voice low. What exactly is the requirement? Is it financial? No, Mr. Finch replied, enjoying the suspense. The requirement is community engagement. Specifically, each of you must dedicate 2,500 hours, that is, 2,500 hours, of documented professional service to the Lighthouse Legacy Trust. Dominic's face twisted in sheer, unadulterated disgust. 2,500 hours? That's almost 3 full years of working without pay. I'm a venture capitalist. I don't volunteer. My time is valued at $500 an hour. This is an outrage. The clause specifies that the service must utilize your core professional skills, Mr. Finch stated, completely unfazed by the outburst. Dominic, you will establish a sustainable endowment fund and mentor young entrepreneurs at the center. Juliet, you, with your background in art history, will curate educational programs and an art therapy wing. Tristan, your skills in logistics will manage the operational flow and maintenance of the estate. The clock starts when the trust certifies your acceptance of the terms. And if we refuse this insane, manipulative charity work? Juliet demanded, her voice rising to a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. Mr. Finch's answer was devastatingly simple, hitting them where it hurt most, their wallets. If any heir refuses, or fails to complete the 2,500 hours within 4 years, their entire portion of the $50 million will be forfeited and transferred into the perpetually restricted funds of the Lighthouse Legacy Trust. This was the core of my final lesson. It wasn't about the money. It was about forcing them to contribute, to learn empathy, to reconnect with the spirit of giving that I had tried so hard to instill. I was demanding that they earn their inheritance by becoming better human beings. They had to choose between their wealth and their character. My children had just been handed a fork in the road. Choose compassion or choose financial exile. And I knew exactly which one Dominic, the most calculating, would choose first. War. I was wheeled back to my room, feeling a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a quiet triumph. The battle for the Opal Coast estate was won. The battle for their souls had just begun. A few days later, Cora came to visit, her eyes sparkling with pride. Grandmother, you won. They are in complete disarray. Uncle Dominic is threatening lawsuits and has already contacted 5 different law firms. But Aunt Juliet, she's actually researching art therapy workshops. I think she might choose the path of light. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I couldn't move my facial muscles much, but it was enough for Cora. Juliet's reaction was a flicker of hope. She had always been swayed by public perception. Perhaps the thought of being seen as the generous philanthropist was enough to motivate her service. Tristan was already setting up a complex time-tracking system for the 2,500 hours. But Dominic? He was the ultimate holdout. He saw the clause as a personal affront, a challenge to his financial supremacy. He wasn't going to volunteer. He was going to destroy the trust, one legal threat at a time. Dominic's lawyer claimed the trust was my spiteful act, but its true foundation was built on an old promise, a debt of friendship I could never fully repay, a secret buried for 35 years. The hospital stay extended to several weeks. I was moved from intensive care to a rehabilitation ward. The ability to move my left hand was a monumental victory, a tangible sign that I was clawing my way back. My speech remained slurred, limited to quiet, strained words, but my mind was sharp, ready for the next round of legal and emotional warfare. Dominic's reaction to the ethical service clause was exactly as predicted, utter legal warfare. He filed suit, claiming the clause was unduly onerous, punitive, and the result of coercion during a period of diminished capacity. He hired a powerhouse litigation team, charging fees in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was willing to spend millions to save the principle of entitlement. Mr. Finch, cool and unperturbed, was ready. He presented medical records proving my mental acuity during the signing of the codicil 6 months prior, complete with a psychological evaluation. The legal foundation was unassailable. The heart of the defense, however, was Aisha Varma and the powerful, deeply human history of the Lighthouse Legacy Trust. I wanted to tell the world the story, not just for the legal defense, but for my own emotional closure. It was a story that needed to be heard, a story about friendship, tragedy, and the true meaning of sanctuary, a story that began 35 years ago. 35 years ago, I met Margaret. We were young mothers, struggling to balance ambition and family. Margaret was an architect with a heart for the community. She was the one who introduced me to the concept of ethical wealth, money used as a tool for systemic change, not personal accumulation. Margaret's dream was to convert a beautiful, neglected coastal property into an urban sanctuary, a place where young women, often fleeing difficult circumstances, could find the stability and resources to pursue a college education, a safe harbor. She called it the lighthouse, inspired by the enduring, guiding light that cuts through the darkest storms. When my husband, Arthur, and I purchased the Opal Coast Estate, a sprawling mansion on 5 acres, it was purely a status symbol. We were caught up in the consumerist whirl of the 1990s. Margaret, ever the gentle critic, spent an entire weekend walking the property with me, not admiring the Italian marble, but the potential of the land. Ilara, she had said, standing on the bluff overlooking the pounding Pacific waves, the wind whipping her hair. This view, this land, it is too beautiful to be just one family's playground. It is meant to be shared. It is meant to heal those who have been broken by the world. I dismissed her then, prioritizing my social calendar. But her words planted a seed in the deepest part of my conscience. 20 years ago, Margaret was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. We made a pact, a sacred promise. She was worried about her goddaughter, Aisha, who was then a gifted, socially conscious architecture student, but who lacked the capital to pursue her vision for community development. Promise me, Ilara, Margaret whispered on her deathbed, her voice thin but resolute, 7 years ago, that you will find a way to make the lighthouse real. That you will give Aisha the foundation she needs to build it. Don't let the money swallow the meaning, I promised. I swore on my children's future. When Arthur and I established the trust 10 years ago, secretly transferring the Opal Coast estate to its custodianship, it wasn't an act of spite against my children. It was the fulfillment of that sacred oath to my closest friend. It was an act of faith in the power of redemption, a final, definitive declaration of my personal values. The court hearing was about to expose a secret so profound, it would redefine every dollar I ever earned. Dominic saw sentiment. The court saw an ironclad promise. At the court hearing, Dominic's lawyer argued that the trust was a reckless and unusual arrangement intended solely to spite the legitimate heirs. Why would a woman of Mrs. Sterling's stature give away her most valuable asset, estimated at $20 million, to a non-relative Ms. Varma. The opposing lawyer challenged Aisha. Aisha, poised and articulate, replied with quiet dignity. "The trust was not given to me, sir. It was given to a mission. And I am not a non-relative. I am the physical manifestation of a promise made between two lifelong friends. The Lighthouse Trust is Mrs. Sterling's way of paying a debt of honor. It is her greatest legacy, a legacy Mr. Sterling helped build." She then presented the court with Margaret's final, deeply moving letter to me, detailing her dream, a letter that detailed how the profound beauty of the coast could heal broken lives. The emotional impact was undeniable. The judge reserved ruling, but the tide was turning. The case was moving from a legal spat over $50 million to a profound moral battle about the value of human promises. My children were forced to sit there, listening to the deeply moving story of my friendship with Margaret. They saw the devastating contrast between the purity of the trust's mission and the ugliness of their own avarice. I saw a flicker of shame in Juliet's eyes, a deep sense of inadequacy in Tristan's. But Dominic? He remained cold, calculating, and absolutely determined to win, regardless of the emotional cost. He saw the story as mere sentimentality, a weak point to be exploited. He was about to learn that sentimentality, when backed by ironclad legal documents and a moral imperative, is the most formidable power of all. Dominic thought he found a loophole in the trust's charter, but he was walking directly into a trap laid not by me, but by my husband, the ultimate architect of justice. Armed with a $40 million secret, Dominic and his legal team were relentless. They pivoted their attack, focusing their next assault on the very foundation of the Lighthouse Legacy Trust, the charter's financial viability. They correctly identified that if the trust could not sustain itself, the courts might intervene and potentially revert the property to the main estate. The trust's mission is admirable. Your Honor, Dominic's lawyer argued during the next court session, leveraging corporate cynicism. But the operating costs for a $20 million estate are astronomical. We estimate annual maintenance, staffing, and scholarship costs at over $2 million. Ms. Sterling's remaining liquid assets are the only way to fund this ethical service. We contend that the ethical service clause is merely a desperate mechanism to coerce the heirs into funding this reckless charity, forcing them to contribute their share of the $50 million. It was a shrewd, cynical argument designed to appeal to the court's pragmatic financial sense, and it almost worked. The judge, acknowledging the potential instability, demanded irrefutable proof of the trust's long-term financial independence within 7 days. This was the perfect moment to reveal the second, and most devastating financial secret, a surprise that even my own trusted counsel, Mr. Finch, had forgotten about. I had been secretly working with Cora, using the encrypted phone and my slow, deliberate movements to prepare the next phase of the defense. Cora, with her knowledge of family documents and a keen eye for detail, was invaluable. She found the key in a forgotten safe deposit box, labeled simply Caledonia. "Mr. Finch," I whispered to my lawyer during a break in my physiotherapy session, my voice still weak but the words clear and insistent. "Tell them about the Caledonia portfolio. Arthur's final silent gift. It's the answer to the financial viability question." Mr. Finch's eyes widened in realization. He had forgotten. Even he, my trusted confidant, was only privy to about 90% of my husband's and my intricate plans. Arthur, ever the quiet strategist, had anticipated this exact challenge. The next day in court, Mr. Finch presented a separate sealed document. It was a letter from my late husband, Arthur, dated 11 years ago, just 1 year before his death. And 1 year before the trust was formally established, Arthur, a man of quiet integrity and incredible financial foresight, had long observed the emerging entitlement in his children. He knew that the only way to truly protect the Lighthouse mission was to fund it beyond the reach of their potential greed. He had created a financial shield. "This document," Mr. Finch announced, holding up the aged parchment letter, "reveals the existence of the Caledonia Reserve Fund, a separate, unlisted portfolio of high-yield stocks and bonds established by Mr. Arthur Sterling during his final years." The opposing counsel immediately objected, sputtering with disbelief. Objection. Relevance. This is extraneous to the Sterling estate and was not disclosed. On the contrary, Mr. Finch countered, his voice booming with confidence. The document states that the Caledonia Reserve Fund, valued at the time of Mr. Sterling's death at $40 million, was irrevocably designated to be released to the Lighthouse Legacy Trust immediately upon the trust's successful activation, specifically to guarantee its perpetual endowment. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. $40 million, a staggering amount that had been growing, unlisted and untouched, compounding silently for over a decade, completely separate from the estate the children were fighting over. 40 million reasons why Dominic's lawsuit was doomed. The most calculated man in the room wasn't Dominic, but my late husband, Arthur, Mr. Finch concluded, delivering the final decisive blow, provides the trust with a total endowment exceeding $50 million, generating an annual income well beyond the estimated $2 million operational costs. The trust is entirely self-sufficient, Your Honor. The ethical service clause is therefore not a funding mechanism, but purely an ethical one, a condition of character for the remaining inheritance, a means for Mrs. Sterling to teach her children the values of contribution. The blow was final. Dominic's entire legal strategy, the claim that the trust was financially reckless and reliant on his inheritance, collapsed instantly. His face, usually a controlled mask of corporate confidence, was pale and contorted with disbelief and barely contained fury. He had been outmaneuvered not just by his mother, but by the quiet, strategic genius of his deceased father. The judge, clearly impressed by the strategic brilliance and ethical foundation of the Sterling's plan, delivered a preliminary ruling. The Lighthouse Legacy Trust was legally sound and its endowment was guaranteed. The court upheld the ethical service clause. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Dominic shoved his way through, refusing to comment. But Juliet stopped. Her face was still tear-stained, but now there was a different look, a look of genuine contemplation. "This is not about the money anymore," she whispered to a passing journalist, her voice barely audible. "It's about my father's expectations and my mother's promise." The legal battles were effectively over. The personal battles were just beginning. I knew that Juliet and Tristan, humbled and exposed, might actually embrace the condition. But Dominic? He would never accept defeat. He would find a different way to fight, a way that was far more personal and damaging. I needed to be ready for his final desperate attack. My redemption depended on my children's repentance. But one by one, the family facade began to crumble, revealing the emotional damage I had unwittingly inflicted through years of ambition. The definitive legal victory against Dominic's challenge was a powerful antidote to my physical weakness. Knowing that the Lighthouse Trust was secure with its $50 million endowment, and that my children were legally bound to their ethical choices, filled me with a quiet, steely purpose. I knew the external war was won, but the internal war for their souls had only just begun. Was released from the hospital and moved to the penthouse of my city apartment, a temporary stop before what I hoped would be a return to some semblance of a normal life. Cora was my primary caregiver, my true north in the chaos. Her unwavering support and quiet acts of kindness were the real medicine. Juliet was the first to comply with the ethical service clause. She appeared at the Lighthouse Estate, now officially renamed the Lighthouse Sanctuary, in a borrowed, tasteful, but still expensive dress, initially treating the orientation as a necessary inconvenience. She brought her art history degrees, but very little humility, scheduling only short, manageable 3-hour shifts. However, the reality of the work quickly stripped away her superficiality. She was tasked with organizing a collection of donated art supplies in a dusty, non-air-conditioned wing of the old mansion. More importantly, she was forced to deal with the raw, emotional needs of the young women who would become the trust's first residents. One day, one of the aspiring students, a young mother of 2 named Clara, showed Juliet a canvas she was working on. It was a stark, almost painful depiction of a broken home. filled with harsh, clashing colors. Juliet, in a moment of unguarded, involuntary honesty, critiqued the color palette from a purely academic perspective, pointing out the technical dissonance. Clara, sensitive and defensive, broke down, explaining through sobs that the colors were precisely chosen to reflect the psychological darkness and chaos of her past. Instead of retreating into her professional shell, Juliet did something extraordinary. She put aside her art degree and her social facade. She sat with Clara for 3 hours, not as a wealthy benefactor or a professor, but as a listening ear. She empathized with the artist's struggle and brought her a hot meal, helping her clean the brushes. Cora reported this to me, her voice filled with hope. "Grandmother, Aunt Juliet actually spent 3 hours listening to someone else's pain. She's only logged 22 hours, but I think she's starting to feel it. The money is no longer the motivator." Tristan was also making progress, albeit in his own meticulous, detached way. He was in his element, creating complex logistical systems for the trust's library, security, and transportation. He didn't connect with the people, but he excelled at the process of service. His turning point came when a vital, specialized medical supply delivery, crucial for the health of a pregnant resident, was accidentally sent to a wrong address 300 miles away. Tristan, using his intricate network and a surprising amount of personal tenacity, chartered a small private courier to retrieve the supplies within a 6-hour window. He saved a young woman's much-needed treatment, using his corporate skills for a purpose beyond profit for the first time in his life. He logged the 8 hours for the crisis management with a small, almost undetectable look of pride, but Dominic remained the dark cloud on the horizon. He refused to set foot on the lighthouse estate. He continued his threats, now focused on destroying my reputation and the trust's credibility through insidious, malicious media leaks. "Mother," Cora confessed one evening, her voice shaky. "Uncle Dominic is circulating rumors that you are mentally unstable, that you created the trust purely to manipulate the stock market and gain exorbitant tax advantages. He's telling everyone you are a cruel, cold woman who only cares about appearances, punishing her own children." The accusations were a dagger to the heart. It wasn't the legal threats that hurt. It was the psychological warfare, the attack on my integrity, and the confirmation of his profound misjudgment of my character. Cruel, cold woman? Was that truly how he saw me? My children's bitterness was a mirror reflecting my own past mistakes. I had poured cement into the cracks, but now the foundation of my family was shaking, forcing me to confront my greatest secret. I was forced to confront the truth. My actions, though legally sound and ethically pure now, were partly a response to my own failure as a mother. Arthur and I had provided immense material wealth, but we had been emotionally absent, too focused on building the empire and maintaining the sterling name. We had given them everything but the tools for emotional resilience and empathy. The ethical service clause was not just punishment. It was my final attempt to correct 3 decades of parental oversight. My physical recovery gained momentum. I started walking short distances with a cane. My speech returned slow but steady. I knew the only thing that could truly break Dominic's shield was the truth. The agonizing, foundational truth I had buried for over 30 years. The moment of the ultimate, devastating revelation was imminent. I needed to face Dominic, not as a distant invalid, but as a mother who had made unforgivable mistakes and was now fighting to save her son's soul. Dominic chose war, not service. His rejection of the $16.6 million inheritance was the final, devastating move in a game I had to win. Not with lawyers, but with a mother's last weapon, the truth of their lost sister. Hope Dominic's formal rejection of the ethical service clause sent genuine shockwaves through the financial world, even if it was expected by the family. The legal document was stark and defiant. I, Dominic Sterling, refused to comply with the punitive and self-serving conditions set forth by Alara Sterling. I hereby forfeit my share of the inheritance, approximately $16.6 million, and reserve all rights to pursue litigation against the trust for defamation and interference with my professional life. This was not just about the money anymore. This was a direct personal declaration of war against my legacy and my deepest values. Dominic was willing to sacrifice a massive fortune just to prove he was right, to prove I was wrong, and to destroy the ethical mission I had sacrificed my most valued possession for. The $16.6 million immediately transferred to the permanent endowment of the Lighthouse Trust, a massive financial win for the charity, but a crushing personal loss for me. It confirmed the depth of his entitlement and his willingness to sacrifice everything for pride. My lawyer, Mr. Finch, urged me to sever all ties. Elara, he has made his choice. Focus on Juliet and Tristan. Focus on your recovery. Dominic is a lost cause. A cautionary tale. But I couldn't. A mother's heart doesn't have an off switch. I saw his fury as a misguided, profound cry for help. A reflection of the deep-seated emotional deprivation he had suffered under our focus on external success. I decided to bypass the lawyers and the boardroom one last time. I sent Dominic a single handwritten note via Cora, an invitation he could not ignore. The lighthouse is open. Come see the truth, not the dollar sign, or face the public consequences of your final rejection. He didn't reply. Instead, his team released a devastating, calculated leak to a major financial news outlet. Sterling matriarch chooses shady charity over own children. Allegations of tax fraud and cult-like atmosphere at Lighthouse Center. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Donations to the trust dropped by over 30%. Aisha received threats. The young women residents felt vulnerable and exposed, their safe harbor under attack. Dominic wasn't just fighting me. He was attacking the vulnerable people the trust was designed to protect. He had crossed a moral Rubicon. I knew then that the time for sentimentality was utterly over. I needed to deploy the final, most painful secret I possessed. The secret that explained why I had focused so fiercely on the concept of a safe harbor. I had to expose my own decades of pain to save my son. Dominic's final, desperate act forced me to reveal the secret of my own devastating past, the truth of the fire that nearly took my life, and the life of my first child. I called an impromptu family meeting, inviting Dominic directly with an ultimatum. If he didn't come, I would release a full public statement detailing the true purpose of the trust, which would further humiliate him. To my surprise, he showed up along with Juliet and Tristan. The atmosphere was thick with resentment and raw anxiety. I stood up, discarding my cane. It was painful but necessary. I needed to be strong, whole, when I delivered the truth that was the very foundation of the lighthouse. Dominic, I began, my voice clear but strained, commanding attention. You call the lighthouse a scam. You call me a cold, cruel woman. You feel entitled to the money I earned. But I need you to understand one thing. The lighthouse is not about charity. It is about debt and survival. I paused, gathering my strength, making direct eye contact with all three of them. When I was 20 years old, a year before I met your father, I was a young single mother. I had a daughter. Your sister. Her name was Hope. The revelation stunned them into a profound, aching silence. They had never known of a sibling. Their world had just tilted on its axis. I was living in a cheap, run-down apartment in the city, I continued, fighting back the tears. I was working 2 jobs, barely scraping by, trying to finish college. One night, a fire broke out in the building. A devastating, catastrophic fire started by poor wiring. I escaped, but your sister, Hope, she was only 3 months old. She did not survive the flames, Juliet gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Tristan lowered his head, tears tracing paths through the dust on his skin. Dominic stared at me, his eyes wide, the anger momentarily replaced by a terrifying shock, a primal fear. The place where I should have been safe, my home, became my personal hell, a memory of ashes and loss. After the fire, I had nowhere to go. I was alone, destroyed. I nearly quit college. I almost gave up on life. But a group of women, strangers, took me in. They gave me a room, tuition money, and the therapy I needed. They were my safe harbor, my first unofficial lighthouse. I looked directly at Dominic, my focus absolute. You ask why I would give a $20 million estate to charity instead of to my children? Because I promised the universe that if I ever had the means, I would build the kind of sanctuary that saved my life. The Lighthouse Trust is a monument to the daughter I lost, Hope, and a thank you to the strangers who saved me. It is the only thing that justifies the vast wealth I accumulated. The money you forfeit, Dominic, it doesn't go to me. It goes to save the hopes of this generation. You can attack the trust, but you will be attacking the memory of your own sister, your blood. That is the truth you must live with. The impact was seismic. The secret of their sister, Hope, ripped the family apart, forcing my children to see their greed as a betrayal of a legacy they never knew existed. A legacy born from fire and loss. The silence following the revelation of Hope's existence was the most profound I had ever known. It was not a silence of anger, but one of devastating collective grief. It was the sound of an entire family history being rewritten in a single, agonizing, gut-wrenching moment. Dominic, usually so guarded, looked utterly broken. His veneer of corporate ruthlessness finally cracked, exposing the scared, vulnerable little boy who had yearned for his mother's unqualified approval. "A sister," he repeated, the words barely a rasp. "Why? Why did you keep this from us? All these years? A secret that big?" "Because of the pain, Dominic," I confessed, my voice shaking with the effort and the emotional release. The loss of Hope was a trauma I buried deep, a wound that never truly closed. When I met your father, Arthur, he helped me heal and we vowed to start a new life. I believed that by not speaking of her, by burying the tragedy, I was protecting you from the darkness I had faced. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. By hiding the wound, I hid the reason for the cure. By hiding the tragedy, I hid the true purpose of my ambition and the true meaning of the wealth you came to covet. Juliet, now fully stripped of her superficiality, rushed to my side, not to argue about the money, but to embrace me. Her tears were genuine this time, tears for a sister she never knew, and for the hidden decades-long suffering of her mother. "Mother, I'm so sorry. I didn't know the depth of what we lost." She clung to me, seeking comfort and offering a rare, unqualified moment of love. Tristan remained seated, but his head was in his hands. He was processing the fact that the life he lived, the life of extreme privilege and ease, was founded on a mother's unspeakable pain and a life lost to a devastating tragedy. The numbers, the logistics, suddenly meant nothing compared to the human cost. Dominic, however, retreated physically. He needed space to process the revelation, a truth that completely shattered the narrative he had built, that he was a victim of his mother's cold, capricious cruelty. He was now forced to see himself as the aggressor, attacking a mission that honored a dead sister and a mother's sacrifice. He stood up, his face ashen, and walked toward the door. "This changes nothing legally, Mother," he said, his voice hard but lacking its usual conviction. The words were automatic, a defense mechanism. "The forfeiture is still valid. The lawsuit against the trust for defamation will continue. I need time. Do not contact me." He left, the door closing with a quiet finality that was more chilling than a slam. His mind was at war with his heart. My secret was a double-edged sword. It redeemed my character, but it ignited Dominic's shame into a blinding rage against the one person who embodied my past, Aisha Varma. The revelation, however, had the intended profound effect on the other two. Juliet and Tristan dove into their ethical service hours with a fierce, newly discovered sense of purpose. They were no longer working for the $16.6 million. They were working for Hope, for me, and for the integrity of their father's legacy, the unseen, powerful legacy of compassion. Juliet organized a benefit gala, using her high society connections to raise over $500,000 in one night for the Lighthouse's scholarship fund. She didn't seek the spotlight. She simply worked, channeling her passion into helping young mothers like the one I once was. Tristan implemented a state-of-the-art security system at the estate, not just to protect the physical assets, but to create the literal safe harbor I had failed to have decades ago. He tracked his hours with pride, seeing the numbers not as an obligation, but as a quantifiable commitment to human safety. But Dominic's absence was a corrosive force. He continued his campaign of defamation, using shell companies and anonymous sources to spread vicious lies about the trust. He was targeting the foundation of the very place that honored his deceased sibling. Aisha Varma, the trust's architect and manager, bore the brunt of his attacks. Dominic saw her as the final obstacle, the one who physically stood in his way of the Opal Coast estate. "He's personalizing the attacks, Alara," Aisha told me during a secure video call. "He's trying to dig up old dirt on my family, on my friend Margaret. He's relentless. He thinks that if he can discredit me, the trust will fail and the property might revert. He's trying to weaponize shame." A shudder ran through me. Dominic had crossed a line that was unforgivable. He was no longer fighting for money. He was fighting for destruction. I had given him the painful truth, but he had twisted it into a justification for revenge. I knew then what I had to do. I had saved the trust. Now I had to save my son, even if it meant deploying the one final devastating card that would strip him of his professional identity. Dominic's legal attack was a smokescreen. The real threat was a hostile takeover, and the only defense lay in a hidden clause my father-in-law had written 50 years ago, a clause that stripped him of the one thing he valued more than his $16 million share. His name. Dominic escalated his attacks dramatically. He wasn't relying on weak lawsuits anymore. He was leveraging his professional expertise in hostile acquisitions and destabilization. He sought to exploit a little-known clause in the trust's charter that mandated a special board review if the trust's public confidence rating fell below a certain threshold for 6 consecutive months. He engineered the public relations nightmare to trigger that clause, aiming to have the courts appoint an external, politically favorable trustee, someone he could manipulate to eventually liquidate the Opal Coast estate. "This is not just defamation. Ilara," Mr. Finch warned me, his face etched with worry. "This is a full-scale assault. He's using shell companies to buy up the bonds and securities of the trust's major corporate sponsors, threatening to destabilize their own portfolios if they don't withdraw funding and publicly denounce the lighthouse. He is targeting the trust's very existence." The pressure was immense. Aisha was working 20-hour days just to manage the crisis. The residents were becoming fearful, their new home feeling threatened. I realized that Dominic's intelligence was his greatest weapon, but also his most profound blind spot. He was so focused on the present financial and legal maneuvering that he completely overlooked the deep, foundational legacy of the Sterling family, a legacy that extended 2 generations beyond me, a legacy of ethical conduct. My father-in-law, the original Dominic Sterling, a man of immense old-world integrity and caution, had established the core legal framework for the entire Sterling Empire 50 years ago. He was a man who hated short-sighted greed, a man who saw the family name as a sacred trust, not a financial tool. I asked Mr. Finch to pull the original Sterling family charter, a document so old, complex, and voluminous that no one had looked at it in decades, especially not my own children. Who thought anything before the 90s was irrelevant? "I need the Sterling Conduct Clause," I instructed, my voice unwavering. "The one Arthur told me about, the one governing the name itself. The one protecting the name from the very corruption Dominic now embodies." 3 days later, Mr. Finch returned, his face a mixture of grim determination and suppressed excitement. He had found it. The clause was buried deep within the 123rd Amendment of the Charter. My late father-in-law had foreseen this exact moment of greed and malice, and his forgotten clause was about to strip Dominic of the one thing he valued more than money, his identity. The Sterling Conduct Clause stated that any direct, demonstrable action by a primary family member that brings irreparable and measurable public disrepute to the Sterling name, especially if that action is driven by unjustified malice or personal avarice, could trigger a mandatory family arbitration panel. If the panel, composed of disinterested parties, found against the offender, the consequence was not mere financial forfeiture, but complete and permanent expulsion from the family's official legal and business structures. The offender would be legally prohibited from using the Sterling name in any professional capacity. For Dominic, a venture capitalist whose entire brand, network, and success was tied to the power and reputation of the Sterling name, this was financial and professional annihilation. It was a fate far worse than losing $16.6 million. It was an identity death sentence. I called the family arbitration panel into session. It was composed of 3 elderly, fiercely traditional family lawyers and 2 non-family, independent directors of the oldest Sterling Foundation. The rules were strict, the proceedings confidential, and the decision binding. Dominic arrived arrogant and dismissive, accompanied by a high-priced lawyer who deemed the whole process a sentimental, toothless farce. He was ready to defend his actions as sound business strategy. I did not speak. My silence was the most powerful testimony. Mr. Finch presented the evidence. Dominic's internal memos detailing the smear campaign against Aisha, the documented threats to corporate sponsors, and the direct, undeniable link between his malicious actions and the drop in the trust's public confidence rating. Then, Mr. Finch presented the evidence of Hope's story, the sister he never knew, and the fact that Dominic's actions were deliberately undermining the very legacy of compassion I was trying to establish in her name. It was the undeniable proof of unjustified malice. The panel deliberated for 7 excruciating hours. When they returned, the chairman, a stern, gray-haired lawyer who had worked for my father-in-law, read the ruling. It was not a legal document. It was a devastating moral condemnation. They found Dominic Sterling guilty of bringing irreparable public disrepute to the family name. His punishment, immediate and permanent exclusion. He would lose his seat on all corporate boards and, most painfully, be legally barred from using the Sterling name in his professional life. From that moment forward, he would be known only by his given name, Dominic. The power of the Sterling name, the foundation of his wealth and ego, was stripped away. The silence that followed this verdict was the silence of a man utterly destroyed by his own avarice. Stripped of his name and reputation, Dominic faced the ruins of his life. His last chance for redemption lay not in a courtroom, but in the ashes of the very fire that had taken his sister's life. The effect of the arbitration verdict on Dominic was immediate and utterly catastrophic. The news was kept confidential by the panel but spread like wildfire through the closed circles of high finance. Without the Sterling name, his venture capital firm collapsed overnight. Investors pulled out, sensing a profound, career-ending ethical failure. The man who measured life in millions of dollars was now facing professional insolvency and permanent disgrace. He was humbled, but the initial response was denial and a desperate attempt to externalize the blame. He blamed me. "You destroyed me, Mother," he accused me during a tense final phone call, his voice raw with despair. "You used a relic of a charter from 50 years ago to commit financial murder. You are a cold, calculating monster who only cares about her image." "I gave you the choice, Dominic," I replied, my voice steady, uncompromising. "I offered you 2,500 hours of service, a path to empathy and character. You chose hundreds of hours of malice and destruction. I did not destroy the Sterling name. You did, with your calculated, unforgivable actions against a charity dedicated to saving the vulnerable." The turning point, the true moment of reckoning, came a week later, not through a lawyer, but through Cora. She had been quietly tracking the history of the fire that took Hope's life. She had found the address of the old, now abandoned apartment building. She obtained old city records and found the exact footprint of the devastation. Cora, without telling anyone, drove to the site and took pictures. The building was a scarred monument to poverty and neglect, slated for demolition, a physical, undeniable piece of the past. She sent the pictures to Dominic's anonymous prepaid phone along with a short, simple message that cut through his pride. "This is where your sister died. Uncle, this is the real cost of the silence and the true foundation of the lighthouse." The effect was profound. Dominic, in his professional destruction, was finally stripped of his armor. The loss of the name had created a vacuum, and the image of the burned-out building filled it with raw, unadulterated pain. He drove to the site immediately. He didn't call me. He called Cora, his voice broken. "Cora." His voice was hoarse, defeated. "I'm standing here. This place, it's a ruin. I can smell the smoke and the despair even now. It's real. All of it is real." "Grandmother almost died here, Uncle," Cora said gently, guiding him toward the truth. "She was saved by strangers. That is why she built the lighthouse. It's a promise, not a portfolio." Dominic stood there, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my trauma and my unbreakable promise. He finally understood that the Opal Coast estate and the $20 million was never his birthright. It was the culmination of a mother's desperate need to pay a life-saving, ethical debt. The shame was overwhelming. My son was staring into the void of his own making. The path back to the family was not through the $16 million he lost, but through the one thing he was still capable of creating, a genuine apology for the destruction he caused. That evening, Dominic arrived at my apartment. He didn't bring a lawyer or a contract. He brought a small, wilting bouquet of wildflowers he had found near the old estate. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was simply Dominic, stripped bare. He dropped to his knees. "Mother," he whispered, his eyes red and raw with emotion. "I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I only saw the zeros. I only saw the betrayal of the money. I never saw the betrayal of your pain. I never saw hope." It was the first time he had spoken his sister's name, a final, necessary act of acknowledgement. It broke the last shard of ice around my heart. "You didn't destroy me, Mother," he confessed, tears finally streaming down his face, a complete surrender. "You saved me from myself. I was going to ruin my life chasing a fortune I thought I was owed. But I owe you. I owe the memory of my sister. I owe Aisha Varma and the trust. I have nothing left professionally," he admitted. "But I still have my skills. I can't be Dominic Sterling anymore. But I can be a man who helps people. Please, give me the chance to complete the service. I don't want the $16 million. I just want to earn my way back into your life and back into the Sterling name through my actions, not my birthright." My work was almost done. I had secured the legacy, and I had, through the hardest way possible, begun to save my son's soul. The family was reunited, not by wealth, but by shared service. But the final, most profound lesson was a surprise even to me. A gift from my late husband, Arthur, who had the final, most healing vision, Dominic, now going by Dominic Thorne, using my maiden name to signify his new beginning, began his ethical service with a ferocity that matched his former greed, only now it was channeled for good. He didn't just join the trust. He transformed its financial sustainability. He used his disgraced but brilliant financial acumen to launch a pro bono consulting division at the lighthouse, helping the young residents set up personal budgets, investment strategies, and small business plans. His work was meticulous, ethical, and deeply personal. He logged his 2,500 hours not with resentment, but with a fierce, quiet intensity. He was earning his redemption, one spreadsheet at a time. Juliet and Tristan, now working alongside their brother, found a profound new dynamic in their relationship. The old rivalries and the silent competition for my approval were gone, replaced by mutual respect and a shared purpose greater than their individual ambition. Juliet successfully launched the art therapy program, watching her patients, the young mothers, find release and healing through creativity. She found more fulfillment in the genuine thank you notes from the residents than in any compliment she ever received at a society gala. She was truly using her talents to heal, logging her final hours with joy. Tristan's logistical systems were now the envy of nonprofits across the state, ensuring the smooth operation of the entire 5-acre estate. He trained 5 young residents to take over his systems, creating a sustainable internal structure. The Sterling family was finally whole, forged in the heat of a crisis, tempered by shared service. The initial betrayal had led to the ultimate necessary reconciliation. My husband's foresight extended beyond money. His final instruction revealed the true heartbreaking purpose of the lighthouse. A purpose that brought my first daughter, Hope, home in spirit. After 1 year of continuous, dedicated service by all 3 children, I received the final letter from Mr. Finch. It was an instruction Arthur had left with him, meant to be opened only after the Lighthouse Trust was fully operational and the children had completed at least 1,000 hours of service. This was Arthur's final, perfect act of love and healing. The letter read, "My dearest Alara, if you are reading this, your heart is whole again. And the lighthouse is a beacon that shines brighter than the $20 million we forfeited. The trust is built on Margaret's dream, your trauma, and our love. But the final, true purpose of the Opal Coast Estate is its name. It must be renamed after the one who started it all, our first daughter. The Lighthouse Legacy Trust is hereby permanently and irrevocably renamed the Hope Sterling Sanctuary. The primary goal of the trust is not just to provide education, but to provide a place where single mothers can bring their children, a nurturing, completely safe environment where no child is ever lost to the darkness or neglect again. The estate, with its 5 acres of coastal land, is to be developed with a dedicated, state-of-the-art childcare and early education center, named the Hope's Light Pavilion. This is our true legacy. Alara, not the money we saved, but the life we can protect. This is the only way to heal the past. I was completely overwhelmed. Arthur had known the depth of my pain and had planned the ultimate act of healing, a place of safety and education named for the child I had lost. The trauma of the fire, of the past, was finally transformed into the potential of the future. The circle was complete. The renaming ceremony was small, but deeply emotional. The 3 children stood with me, their faces reflecting pride, not avarice. We are here to rename this sanctuary, this place of profound transformation, I announced, my voice strong and clear. From this day forward, the Lighthouse Legacy Trust is the Hope Sterling Sanctuary. I looked at my children, now unified by their empathy and service. Hope has finally come home, and her memory will protect generations to come. My journey, from the silent, paralyzed woman in the hospital bed to the matriarch standing firm on the bluff, was complete. The initial betrayal had led to the ultimate redemption. I thought my life was being auctioned off for $20 million, but the betrayal was the universe's painful gift. It forced me to trade a shallow fortune for a profound purpose, saving my children's souls and honoring the memory of my first daughter. True inheritance isn't in what you receive, but in what you choose to give. My children finally learned that lesson, and it transformed a curse into a powerful, living legacy. Don't wait for a crisis to define your values. Find your own lighthouse. Subscribe now, share this story, and tell us, what is the true legacy you want to leave behind? Alara Sterling, now fully recovered and managing the Foundation's oversight, watched the final touches being put on the Hope's Light Pavilion. It was a brightly colored, state-of-the-art childcare center, bustling with the happy, energetic sounds of children, the very sounds that had been violently silenced in my life so many decades ago. This was my personal, profound healing. My 3 children eventually received their full portions of the $50 million inheritance, having all fully and honorably satisfied the 2,500 hours of service. But the money no longer held the same power. They used it not for lavish personal spending, but to fund scholarships, build additional affordable housing units for the sanctuary, and establish permanent mentorship programs. They had learned the greatest, most enduring lesson. Wealth is not a prize to be hoarded, but a tool to be wielded for the betterment of others. Juliet was now on the sanctuary's board of directors, bringing her fundraising prowess to sustain the burgeoning programs. Tristan had established an entirely new ethical consulting firm focused solely on nonprofit logistics, donating 50% of his time to the sanctuary's operations. And Dominic, now a respected ethical finance consultant, was mentoring 5 residents a week, finding genuine peace and professional pride in helping others build secure futures. He still went by Dominic Thorne, a symbol of the man he chose to become. A man who had earned back the right to his family's name through his character, not his birth. The initial fear of being alone, abandoned by my children, had been replaced by the comforting reality of a family bonded by a shared ethical mission. The silence of the hospital room had been broken, not by my voice, but by the powerful, unifying chorus of compassion my children finally found. The final, educational lesson in my journey is this. The things we hold on to most tightly, money, status, and emotional secrets, are often the very things that poison our lives and the lives of those we love. Sometimes, a shocking betrayal or a devastating loss is required to force us to examine the true foundation of our existence. I had built a legacy of external gold. My children, through their struggle and service, helped me transform it into a legacy of internal light and enduring human connection. Our inheritance was not the $20 million home. It was the opportunity to build a hope-stirring sanctuary. My hope for you, the viewer, is that you don't need a stroke, a lawsuit, or a $20 million lie to start building your own ethical legacy. Find the hidden trauma in your past, find the promise you abandoned, and turn it into a beacon for others. That is the only inheritance that truly matters, and the only one that can never be sold. Join us next time as we explore another powerful tale of family, forgiveness, and finding the true meaning of prosperity. Thank you for watching.